Good morning. It's Market Day Report. We're glad you're with us as we start another trading day. We're 14 minutes away from ringing the opening bell. And before we open this morning, how did we trade in the overnight session? Let's start with the corn market, and a penny and a quarter higher on the December at $4.21 a bushel. We were higher across the board in the corn market. Beans yesterday moving higher at 10.34 and a quarter in the overnight session. That was up 3.5, higher again across the board. What about soy meal? You know, soy meal comes into the session today, even though we were lower overnight with 5 straight days of wins. We'll see whether or not they can reverse the trend from the overnight session and make it 6 in a row. Bean oil overnight moving higher with gains of about a quarter of a penny. Wheat market, let's start with Chicago. Higher overnight, 501.5 on the D's, up a penny and a quarter, while Kansas City comes into today's trading session with a 2-day loss. December overnight, penny and a quarter higher, 486 and a quarter. And spring wheat contracts in the overnight session mostly higher. Cotton market finally down 40 overnight after dipping below 64 cents. Brian Hoops, Midwest Market Solutions. Brian, we'll start with just kind of some erratic trade, if you will, but I guess that's to be expected when we're trading in really tight ranges.
Yeah, you're right, Tony. You know, it is tight ranges. It's very limited as far as our news goes. So we're kind of looking at seasonalities of the market, which are improving for soybeans and meal and for corn. And if you notice, 2 out of those 3 markets have started to change their trend from a downtrending market more to an uptrending market, and corn hopefully could make it 3 out of 3, and they'll start to move higher as well. So we're trading that seasonality, some technicals, momentums, I think certainly higher here for most of these grain markets as we have put in seemingly our harvest lows and have rallied, trying to put in a little bit of post-harvest rally type action. You look at our harvest progress, and even though we don't have USDA data, we do have some of the news wires publishing their own surveys. Bloomberg, for example, saying soybean harvest around 75% done, corn harvest close to 60%. Anytime you start talking about over 50% harvested, then you are talking about your post-harvest rallies coming into play. So we're seeing that type of action with very limited news. Most of the trading is done off of technicals, off of the seasonalities of the market. What news we have this morning, I thought, not really necessarily going to be positive to grain price action, but is overall positive that it was confirmed by the Wall Street Journal that President Trump and his administration has released $3 billion of farm aid for farmers here that badly needed assistance. And so there are about 6,400 FSA workers returning to their jobs tomorrow to facilitate a lot of these programs and distribute some of the money. So we're thankful for that, to get some help for our hardworking farmers out there who certainly struggling as profit margins are tight this year. Even though corn and soybean prices are higher than a year ago, basis levels are probably a little bit wider, especially in the Western Corn Belt, because of much larger yields than what we saw a year ago. Those larger yields will hurt the cash price that the farmer is paid because of that abundant supply. Then it starts to narrow up. In fact, we are seeing a lot of the narrowing of basis already across the Midwest.
All right, Brian, hang on. We'll take a break. Be back in a moment. Talk livestock futures next. This is Market Day Report. Okay, it's been 2 straight sessions higher for live cattle. If they finish higher today, obviously, that would be 2 + 1 and 3, right? Well, let's see. And live cattle futures yesterday, $1.80 higher on the October, 243.65. Remember, that one is set to expire in 8-9 days. So we'll now focus on the December contract and the most action there at 245.42, $1.77 higher. Now, yesterday in the feeder market, we were higher with October, again, set to expire soon, 373.07. but the November 370, 360 as it settled up 92 and a half. And then over to the hogs. Hogs in higher territory yesterday. The D's at 83.30, buck 22 higher. Brian Hoops, Midwest Market Solutions. So we had the proteins kind of sweep it yesterday, all three in higher territory. What's happening?
Oh, not a lot as far as the cash markets go in the cattle country. We're still looking for cash trade to develop this week. It's probably going to be a late week type standoff. We were supposed to have cattle on feed and cold storage reports out Friday. They are going to be nixed because of the government shutdown. There was news wires that published their estimates for the reports coming up on Friday. Looked like this cattle report would be another friendly report, maybe a 2% reduction in on-feed supplies, around 98%. Placement numbers coming in 8 to 9% less than a year ago. Marketing's down a few points as well. But overall, again, it looks like another very bullish report, another very tight supply situation for the cattle market, which is something that I think we already knew. The wild card out there is the U.S. going to buy beef and import into the country? Some of the talks from some of the prominent officials now kind of downplaying the quantity of beef that's going to be brought into the country. And maybe this isn't going to be much of a game changer. Certainly doesn't change the world supply. If if the U.S. buys beef from Argentina and they can't export it to another country, it would stand to reason that the U.S. or maybe another country would step in and fill that export void. It just doesn't change your supplies. And until you dramatically change the supply situation, prices are going to remain high. That's just the supply and demand economics. Hog market, the cash market's really having a tough time stabilizing. Even though we had a good rally in the futures yesterday, 4 or 5 session week high or daily highs in the hogs yesterday, closed middle of the range, and we're looking at a little bit of gains, I think, on the opening this morning for the hogs and probably the cattle market as well.
All right, Brian, before we go, let's look at equities. We'll start with the Dow. It's been higher 3 straight sessions as well. A little bit of red in the futures as we open up this morning. As far as the NASDAQ goes, NASDAQ was in lower territory yesterday, kind of starting there as well, and then just here before the open, S&P a little higher. I mentioned that because Dow yesterday hit a new all-time high. And if we're talking equities, kind of the final thought here, Brian, something known as Beyond Meat. You might want to keep an eye on this stock, not necessarily because it's competing with U.S. beef. I went out yesterday and did a little look at what these patties, these Beyond Beef patties are going for and compared them to U.S. beef. And what did we find? U.S. beef was actually hamburger patties, 100% beef, were cheaper than the Beyond Meat. Anyway, there's a rally happening on Wall Street with Beyond Meat, and it has nothing to do really with the product. It's become,
there's no comparison in the taste either.
Yeah, it's become a meme stock, and that's what happens when that happens. Brian, great to see you. We'll hear you this afternoon on Commodity Wrap on Sirius XM.